This episode of the Disruption Lab is taped in front of a live studio audience. Andrew, you have spent years helping companies understand, how markets work and how they think. And now that you've stepped back from the company that you've built, what looks different when you're no longer inside the system every day?
Wow, what a philosophical questions to start. I love it. First and foremost, perspective, right? An opportunity to think back at the things that we built, all the wonderful decisions that we did make that were the right ones, some of the decisions that maybe we would have revisited and went another direction. But overall, honestly, just incredibly proud of the human beings that we managed to collect, incredibly thoughtful and thankful for the thing that we were able to build. And it's given me a lot of joy to be able to step back a little bit and take a look at this organization, what it's become and how it's being led and where it's going next. It gives me great joy to watch it.
That's fantastic. So, my years at Sprint, we did a lot of work with, industry analysts, and I've always been amazed at how analysts influence markets. And so, and I don't think a lot of people see that. They think that the big players are the ones who influence the markets, and I don't know if they understand the role that analysts play in some of that. So why do you think we misunderstand how influence actually works in shaping markets in technology?
Well, to some extent, like the industry analysts, the Forresters, the Gartners of the world, IDC, they are, it's a critical business function inside the B2B space, but it's just widely misunderstood and maybe not even known about by general public. The fact that there are these industry analysts, that they are purveyors of opinion. They're shaping the language that's being used. They're guiding the general market on what they can buy and what to emphasize. What are the things that are being done well? What are the things that are being done poorly? I think it's frustrating anytime that you're running a technology business that there is somebody else out there that can render opinion about the thing that you're building. You're prideful. You clearly and very fairly have a strong opinion about the thing that you've built in the direction that you're going, and you almost always think you're right. And it's incredibly frustrating to talk to these other analysts who are talking to all your competitors, and they're shaping the opinion, and they're putting out a direction in the marketplace. So I think it's probably a combination of some people don't know that they exist, and then the people who do have to engage with them sometimes get frustrated. And I think that does create some confusion about what these analysts do and what influence they have.
I had the analyst team, the industry analyst team at Sprint one time. One of the individuals, I was one of these product owners inside the company that didn't like some of the reports that would come out about how our company was, managing some of these things. And they explained it to me as, well, it's like when you're watching a football game, it's like the referees. Now, I don't know if that's a great metaphor to use some days, I think in these days. But it was, the good ones understand the game, understand how it should be played, understand the rules, but you shouldn't see, you shouldn't see them, right? They should be somewhat invisible, kind of operating behind the scenes a little bit. And I always thought that was helpful perspective for me to understand a little bit. So how does someone become an expert in what goes into that? What goes into becoming someone who's credible enough to be able to, speak to an industry, speak to the trends, speak to some of those things? I mean, that seems like that would be a lot of work to do something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the analysts come from a couple of different primary areas. Well, some of them actually come directly out of school from your typical Ivy League schools, right? So they come right out and they go into one of these research firms and they cut their teeth learning an industry simply by being an academic. But then there are other folks that actually worked in industry, right? So they came from one of the vendors. They're somebody who is inside this technology space. And then they spend an inordinate amount of time talking to people who buy this technology, use this technology, design this technology, build this technology, and sell this technology. So they're talking to people on a nonstop basis. And I honestly feel that they become credible sometimes because they're incredibly thoughtful, and sometimes simply because they talk to more people than just about anybody else, and they get to talk to a lot of people that would otherwise not share their secrets. So it's a fascinating world.
Yeah, was it easy? You think it's easy to get in front of the right people because of the role, or is it sometimes more difficult because I don't want to give away this? It's like talking to reporters, and if there's any reporters in here, I gotta be careful. It's like talking to reporters, I guess. You can never tell how they're gonna tell the story. You
Right.
can always, you know what you're gonna say to them. You can position it however you want, but you don't know how they're gonna write the story.
Right. No, you're 100% right. I mean, and some of our clients at Spotlight have a tendency to be, and not surprisingly, a little bit cautious to start, right? Like, do I want to be vulnerable? Do I actually want to share the real frustrations and challenges of our business? Do I really want to say, you know what, this is what we do really, really well, and this is something that we don't do very well. These are the people that serve remarkably, and these are the people that choose not to serve or self-optimize. And I think that that's a learned process of how do I become the right amount of vulnerable? You don't want to go out there and just unload all your secrets, but at the end of the day, you will never win the trust of these analysts if you are never authentic.
I think Spotlight's been at it for a couple decades.
Yeah.
And so you've had the opportunity to, I think, work across multiple tech eras, right? So enterprise software, digital transformation, some of these other, platform kind of eras that we're in. What cultural patterns do you see that have persisted across, what we see as very different eras of technology?
Well, first and foremost, I think that the things that survive continuously as technology changes is that I'm never cease to be amazed by the sheer level of flexibility and talent that exists inside some of these technology firms. It's really impressive to see the product managers at the Adobes and Googles and some of our clients and IBMs, even IBMs of the world, constantly reinventing themselves as I think through what is the prevailing trend, how do I address and think about that in context of my buyer and the problems that they're trying to solve, and then how do I tell that story in a thoughtful and meaningful way? It's not easy to do what they do. Yeah.
And so you've seen this, and I think maybe I understand the answer there. So you've seen the good product people persist across the eras because they understand that how to reinvent themselves. They understand how to look for those new trends and then maximize and leverage those into something else. So you've probably had the ability to work with or see the evolution of people through those eras as well.
For sure. And the way that it's bought too, especially this whole entire AI trend as it sits today. This is maybe going from traditional software into the SaaS-driven software into low code and different kinds of software and how it's sold and how it's configured and how it's priced. Those have all been different epochs, but now we sit at truly a transformational moment in time that's forcing us all to change the way that we talk about it, the way that we think about product management, the way that we think about talking to analysts about it. It's been fascinating.
I was listening to an interesting conversation at Midwest, the investment conference that just happened here in November, and it was on this idea of, is AI going to kill the SaaS business? And the analyst that was on stage, it was fascinating because he asked everybody in the audience, how many of you use AI? Everybody raises their hand. And he said, how many of you guys pay for the AI? Almost everybody raised their hand. He goes, that's a subscription. It's SaaS. It's not different. But then, the whole question started in, agentic AI, and the model is going to shift to a different buying pattern and so on. For you, when you look at companies within an industry and so on, from your vantage point, what signals tell you that a company is building something meaningful versus kind of chasing momentum or part of the wave of an industry?
We've always found within our client set, and over the last 14 years, we've certainly seen a ton of different ones, right? Folks that are riding along. So what they'll do is they'll spot a tremendous amount of momentum and they'll be the 14th ad tech player right into the marketplace.
Yep.
To a certain extent, what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, you know what, the rising tides float all boats. I too have an offering here. I too am relevant within the space. I too am able to capture a certain part of the market momentum. And unfortunately, the goal is often I too can eventually buy a yacht. Which is part of the goal. But I think the people who are really interesting, the companies that truly are driving the marketplace, their visions are fascinating. They have a better sense, I can tell, they have a better sense of the problem that's being truly manifest, that's out there. They truly have a belief about how the technology can solve that problem in a different way. They are fascinated by how that might transform the way that people actually do work. And the analysts respond to that uniqueness of thought, that innovation and tying truly to the human beings that do the work and the trend that's happening and the problem that needs to be solved. And it is fascinating. Those are the people that have the momentum.
It was explained to me at one point that the way to spot those people was to think about it as there are some who fall in love with the product and the accomplishment, and there are some people who fall in love with the problem.
Yeah.
And it's the ones who fall in love with the problem that really highlight, kind of, I think what you're talking about.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that's absolutely right. Yep.
Okay. Speaking of those founders who fall in love with, kind of the product or, the fundraising and the outcomes and some of those types of things, I think far fewer think about, narrative and category. How early should founders be thinking about how they'll be understood versus that problem set, right?
The analyst channel often turns out to be a forcing function. When you're speaking to a buyer, you have a tendency to speak directly to that problem set. It tends to be relatively short-term and immediate. But when you're speaking to an analyst, now you're talking to the most discerning of buyers. It is presenting your dish in front of the Michelin ratings, right, folks, right? Now you have to not only be able to tell people what you're building, but why you uniquely need to exist. Why is it that what you're doing can't be simply solved by one of your competitors or a technology that sits in another marketplace? So that's a fascinating thing. The analyst interaction forces you to get good at telling that story, and often for services-based firms, probably around 150, 200 people, and then for technology companies, you're probably getting past the 10 million in sort of ARR type area, and then you're being forced to go say, oh, I can no longer just go get base hits. I have to build a national reputation. I have to go talk to these analysts. And the analyst conversation forces you to get good at having that conversation.
Oh, I imagine. I remember when Gartner used to come out with their quadrants, and the goal was being that golden quadrant. If you weren't, it was who messed this up? Who explained this poorly to the analysts? It was like, well, maybe we made a strategic decision that was wrong. I don't know. So speaking of strategic decisions, what's one strategic mistake that you've seen founders make repeatedly? Even with great advisors and great capital, how would you describe that?
I think they get distracted. I think at a certain point for every one of these founders, and you walk into a marketplace, you are immediately distracted by the other opportunities that present themselves. And then in addition to that, you are inundated by the fear, uncertainty, and doubt and the noise that's being put into the marketplace by your biggest competitors. When you are distracted by building things that don't matter, or you're distracted by opportunities not core to the core buyer, the reason why people buy you, that distraction fragments your investment, it fragments your attention, it fragments your strategy, and firms like that really have a hard time gaining that kind of momentum in order to make it to the next level. They lose velocity.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about more underlying technology or the systems level thinking behind some of the work that you've done. So AI platforms, ecosystems, they're all kind of reshaping how your industry works. I think how buyers and the builders interact and so on. How do you think market signaling changes in this new kind of ecosystem when the information moves faster and continues to be more democratized?
Right. What these AI and LLMs essentially done is they've taken the cost and the effort of discovering publicly available information down to zero, right? And what that means is that in the buying cycle of technology, historically speaking, these directors and vice presidents of technology and CIOs, they had to do all their own legwork, or somebody on their team had to do that legwork. Then they went out and talked to all the different vendors, and then took the calls from all the different salespeople, and then they went and talked to an analyst, right? And what we're finding now in this AI world is that people are starting their journey leveraging these LLMs, and they're going much, much further down the path. These LLMs, these AI tools, are rendering an opinion about our clients and about the technologies and about the marketplaces that are out there. And what they say may not always be right, but are often credible just enough.
Okay.
So now, in addition to having to talk to analysts, all our clients are having to ask themselves, how else is my reputation being discovered by these AI tools? Where are they looking? Are they looking on peer review sites? Are they looking on the vendor website? Are they looking at analyst research? Are they scouring LinkedIn? We're finding out that they're in Reddit, right? So these tools are looking at these places. And the real question now for us is, when we signal, we're signaling to a technology that is then revealing a recommendation. And that's changing the way that we have to think about influence.
That's fascinating, and it's, I think for a long time it was the analysts were the most important. Then it became, like, how does SEO get managed and how do people find out? And now it's like the game is so much different and so I would say a little bit more Wild West, but
Oh, it's changing.
less structured from that side of the equation. If you were advising a founder today, how would you help them decide which voices matter? Analysts, customers, investors, the market. How should founders be thinking about that today?
So what we've had to make an investment is real-time analysis and almost like leveraging like SEO tools. And back in the day, that would go out and like try to find where what was influencing your rating or your ranking. We're now monitoring all the different sources that the LLMs trust in order to render an opinion. So isn't that fascinating? So we're leveraging technology to find out from a histogram perspective, what are the biggest parts of the internet that are influencing the recommendations of their robot, right?
Oh, wow, okay.
So we're having to go do that. So rather than having an ability to just guess, we have the data to say, hey, listen, Reddit is 4th and peer review sites are 1 in the category of HR tech. Right? And then we're saying, okay, now that's what we have to invest in. And then as the analysts start bringing out their research from behind the paywall and making it available to the machine, their voice is now going to increase as well. So it's not static. So our recommendations now, whereas I used to be able to go, hey, listen, analysts are going to be 74% of all the influence. I now have to go, analysts are currently 32% of 49%, but are going to be, I suspect, 72% of 51% moving forward. So I have to like it's constantly changing, and it forces us to make different recommendations.
I would not think about that. So now you're not advising on the market, you're advising on the market, how the market listens or how the market.
That's right. That's right.
That's fascinating. Andrew, let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the leadership and personal insight that you've got in terms of building an organization and building a company like that. Oftentimes when we see someone who's stepping back from, something that they've built, it's rarely discussed honestly. What did you underestimate about that transition, and whether it was, emotionally or intellectually?
Well, it's definitely a mourning process. There's no doubt. You hear people say that it's a mourning process, but there really is a mourning process.
Say more, yeah.
Yeah, so when Rick Nash is my business partner, and he and I started the business March 1st, 2012, we built this company in the vision of both our personalities, the thing that matters to us, right? It's a reflection of our ambition, which is that we wanted to be the very best in market. It was reflective of what was important to us, which is the human beings that worked there and having that employee experience and truly engaging the talent and letting them be successful. But as you pull back, right, that part of you and that reflection and that ability to truly shape the things that matter, this baby that you built, it's hard. You're walking back out of that, and that is a mourning process to say and go, well, that's still a fantastic company. I still trust my business partner implicitly, but just foundationally, it's less of me. And that's a thing that you have to go through.
Spent 24 years at Sprint. When I left, I didn't realize how much of my identity was embedded in, it came from the work I did, or how much I'd married those two things together. And so I advise people, maybe unwisely, don't let that happen to you. But then you stop and you reflect on it and you think that's what makes great companies, are those ones who pour themselves into it and associate that identity to the work and pour that part of themselves into the work.
There's no way to do it halfway. The only way to achieve true love is to be vulnerable to being hurt, right? The only way you're going to build something great is to have all of you in it, and then when that thing can hurt you, and that's when you know that you're really part of it, right? You have to be vulnerable that way.
I'd never heard anybody equate it to love, but I get it. That's fascinating. I get it. All right, I'll go with that. So now when you look back, as you're stepping away and as you look back now, what belief about leadership or strategy did you hold maybe earlier in your career that you found to not be true?
You know, one of the big things that I discovered, it's a sort of a fascinating thing, is that when we first started Spotlight, we thought we could build a lifestyle company. You know, we talked a little bit about, can we create an incredible place with a handful of remarkable human beings do great work for a handful of clients, right?
Yeah.
But we were trying to talk ourselves out of the fact that we ran a professional services business, and in a professional services business, the talent is the most important thing. And talented, smart people want to solve bigger and bigger problems. They want to grow, they want to manage people, they want bigger titles, they want paychecks that are commensurate to their contribution.
Can't keep the
No,
value
right,
of your
exactly.
company if you don't do that.
So the only way to build a professional services organization is to scale it. So while we had this hypothesis that maybe we could build a company like that, we learned quickly from a leadership and decision-making perspective that wasn't going to happen. That you can't keep your talent from flourishing. Yeah, in fact, the only way to do it is to make that world where they do become the professional that they could be. Right? You have to make that possible.
What was the hardest thing that you did?
Other than stepping away?
Okay, fair.
I think the hardest thing I've done is, like when you scale a business, right? There's the organizational scaling, which is I simply have to hire more people. And there's methodological scaling, which is I solve bigger and bigger problems for bigger and bigger customers. And then there's the cultural scaling that happens. I think the hardest thing is the cultural scaling and the organizational scaling and the methodological scaling and still keeping us all together, right? The reality behind it is that if you are an innovative company, that discomfort exists continuously. And how do you continue scaling and bringing all the people along, living inside that discomfort, because that discomfort is growth, that discomfort is innovation, that discomfort is learning, right? And I would say that constantly tuning and fine-tuning and adjusting and learning that cultural scaling aspect, along with the organizational and methodological side, I think that's probably the hardest thing that we had to do.
So if you're going to lay out a framework for someone to say, how do you manage, you're managing that, the scaling of the business to make sure that culture stays intact or is aligned to that scaling, how you do that. What if you could lay out a framework for someone or give them advice on, how to do it, either because you did it that way or you would do it differently in hindsight, what would that be?
There's part that's probably obvious, one that's probably not. The obvious one is that you can't do it yourself, right? Your employees have to own it. Your company is going to continue to change. The problems are going to continue to change. The cultural scaling, it has to be defined and designed by the human beings that live in it. And that means constantly listening, knowing that they have the hand in shaping and making decisions and adjustments and saying, that used to work for us and that no longer works for us. We're going to do something about it, and this is our request, and can we make this decision together? So that is something we had to learn for sure. And the other component, honestly, is have a true north. You have to say things that are your creative brief. Like, so as an example, we said things like, we had our core values. We had 4 core values, and we lived through them, and we rewarded people by them. And when we gave people a call out and said, here's a real-time success, we referenced the core value, and then we gave out bonuses that were part of that core value. So you have to do that, and you have to say some things like, employee experience is the differentiator for Spotlight. Making this the best place to work is what makes us special. And one of our guiding philosophies is that experience has to work for everyone that works here. And now you have that as a strategic guidance, and then the teams have to build underneath it.
Did you and Rick set the values, or was that also a co-creation process with your employees?
It was actually a co-creation. One of our very first employee, Jennifer Sheffield, she actually raised her hand one day and she said, we should probably have core values. Hey, Jennifer, that's great. And she ran this process. It was pretty remarkable. We had everybody write down the things that they thought Spotlight represented, how what are the best characteristics they thought they would describe their coworkers, and the things that they found valuable about themselves. And we sat down and we did an entire word cloud and talked about the things that mattered the most, and we decided that we were going to use that process to pick it.
Now, had you set out to do something like that prior, or was that something that basically was brought to your attention as something that was, important to do? Because it was explained to me once, and this was one of those moments where somebody says something that slaps you in the face, and you're like, oh crap, you're right. I hadn't thought about it. Culture happens whether you are intentional about it or not.
Yeah, I think the intentional was forced upon us. I'd love to say that we were masterminds, but it's absolutely not true. What we did is we started out to say, we should collect amazing human beings, and we should give them all the opportunities to hang out, and we're going to build something incredible together. So we had these general things that we're going to treat people right. We weren't going to put up with any BS, right? We just really wanted great people, but it was this forcing function when you realized that your scaling was inevitable, when you realized that you had to codify the things that you'd done of instinct, and you could no longer drive by the sense of smell, you had to now do things intentionally. It was that forcing function that we said, okay, now let's figure out what committees we need. Let's talk about the core values and how do we write them down. Let's talk about the systems of reward and acknowledgement. How do I ensure that people need to be seen? We had to go and figure out what that meant, and those functions are still evolving every day.
Andrew, if you were talking to a room full of business school students today, if you're just getting ready to graduate, how would you describe leadership to them? What is the role of a leader?
I think a big part of it is negotiating consensus for what success looks like. You may know a particular direction from a business perspective. You may see the vision for the long term, but the reality behind it is if you do not have buy-in, and if you cannot negotiate a consensus for what success looks like, and if you cannot rally people together, and then as anybody here who works in comms knows, it's just also about repeating yourself over and over and over again, and only to have the next person say, I'd never heard that before.
7 times, 7 different ways, yeah.
You just gotta say it over and over again. But, so they were in here, and that's probably a little ephemeral, and maybe a little bit woo-woo, right? So if I had a bunch of business school people, and I think that way to say, listen, you may have the right answer, but the right answer rarely matters. The right answer is about, can you convince the team that you're building that that's the right answer?
So how much of that, so real talk, how much of that is listening, maybe altering, maybe that true empathy part of leadership, if that maybe that's the woo part, and how much of that is social engineering? How much of that is influence as a leader and finding different ways to articulate that vision, to gain that belief and that buy-in? You still know North Star, you've still set values, those types of things. In your opinion, how much of it is one side of that or the other? What's the blend of that?
The 32-year-old version of me would have said social engineering.
Okay.
The 32-year-old version of me was so sure, and I so convinced that I could just think my way to the problem. And the only thing that I need to do is talk people or to engineer something so that it worked. The 50-year-old version of me says that that's not true. I think that that listening, bringing people together, is still a critical component, but it's never ceased to be surprising. But I will say that as the leader, you have to make that decision. The strategic decision of choosing what not to do, the strategic decision of choosing what we're not going to be, the strategic decision that says, this, at the cost of that, is something you still have to do. So at the end, you still have to make those choices. But as I've gotten older, I've been much more surprised that it's significant amount of listening.
Yeah. What would you do differently now that you're, on the other side of this?
Well, we've had some tough spots in the middle of Spotlight. The scaling hasn't been cost-free and hasn't been smooth all the way, right?
Oh, you mean it wasn't just this hockey? It wasn't this hockey stick that we all see in the
When we were doing this thing, it was Rick and I, and we ran all the clients. He and I just split the customers in half, right? It's you take those, and I'll take these, and we'll run this business. And
how did you decide how to do that? Just Was it based on maybe expertise or relationships? How did you decide?
A little bit of personality too,
Okay,
right?
okay.
Rick is smart, decisive, relationship driven. I am maybe just a little bit more strategically focused. I'm probably a little bit more messaging and brand focused. And some of our clients wanted more of that from him, and some of the people wanted more of this from me. So we just kind of divided up that way.
Fit kind of thing.
It was a fit thing, yeah.
All right, go back to what would you do differently?
Yeah, and we were, when we said, oh, shucky, we can't run this as a services business. We have to provide opportunity. We must scale the business. It has to we have to become this new thing, right? We have to invest in this new thing. That means somebody other than you and I need to do the work. Somebody other than you and I need to run the clients, need to do the selling, do the delivery, provide the strategic recommendations. And let me tell you, like, things just fell apart. For 1 year, I think it was 5 years in, was the first year that we didn't grow. It was the first year that we were just like churning clients all over the place. If I think back, right, I would have had a more thoughtful and more pre-planned and less reactive way of moving from he and I doing all the stuff and to somebody other smart person into doing the stuff.
I think you get so deep in it that you don't know how to make that transition though. Like it's almost, I don't want to call it panic mode, but it's just, you're in this survival mode of, and I think I equate it to when people talk about, I need to hire somebody for this role because, we're underwater in this work. And how do you make people underestimate how much time it takes to, interview, make those decisions. Like you have to take time away from the thing that's burying you to be strategic about how you're going to move forward and get the relief. And then there's the transition period of bringing there's all this pain associated with that. Is it similar to that? Is that you're so in it, and so even in hindsight, you might find yourself in that situation again? In the
For sure. And you know what? We were also relying on the things that we did well in the past. Like I was a strategy consultant, right? I wasn't just helping people do analyst relations. I was helping them do business strategy. And Rick wasn't just helping his clients do analyst relations, he was helping them structure their businesses and figure out how to scale, right? So we were leveraging those old skills because we both came from a management consulting background, and those are the things we brought to the table. So to some extent, we need to find, if we're not doing those things that are irreplicable by somebody who doesn't have our experience, what do we replace it with? So it was both methodological and value reinvention, as well as pulling yourself out, as well as restructuring the organization.
It feels personal.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah,
it was a mess.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I look back at all the decks and from our quarterly updates, and there's 1,000 different versions of them.
Oh, I did that not too long ago. Look back at some of the old stuff. I was like, nope, can't do this.
Yeah.
That's too much, too soon, even though it was 20 years ago. All right, if you could design a dashboard for founders today, not metrics, but signals, what are the 3 things they should be paying most attention to that they completely miss?
That they completely miss. I don't know if they miss it, but I will say these are the things that I would pay attention to.
Maybe they undervalue them today or something? Yeah.
I think that I think founders, and I know this because I've talked, but a lot of our clients are founders. Sometimes they lose sight of the customers. So it's really easy to do that. At some point, you look at your roadmap that is well earned and well designed. It's thought and it's negotiated. You've planned it out. You're going to build these capabilities, these strengths, these things, and you don't have the dashboard or listening to know whether your customers still want it. And I think that component is a foundational thing that you would think that people wouldn't lose sight of, but it's surprisingly easy to lose sight of.
Yeah,
so that for sure. The second component is, I think that employees, just because they don't leave, doesn't mean they're engaged. I think that there's a very big risk that people who run businesses have a bunch of non-net promoters that work inside their company.
Isn't that the worst case scenario?
Yeah, right? It's the worst. They're 6 and 7/8, right? 5, 6, 7, 8, the non-detractors but non-promoters of your business. they work at your company, and they would all take another job if it was presented.
Yeah.
And they might not solve that problem if they weren't intrigued by
But they're too complacent to do anything
That's
about it. They're
exactly
just sitting
right.
in the chair. Yeah.
That NPS and a truthful one about the people that work at the company that you're building, like you better have that on your dashboard, and better have it nice and clean.
How many folks really focus something like NPS internally versus just focusing on the external? Yeah.
Not enough. You're speaking of the analyst research. It was a few years ago that we walked into a presentation. One of the analysts was talking about like NPS scores, and they did a correlation that says my customer satisfaction score, CSAT, and my stock price. And they did a satisfaction score correlation with stock price. And the companies with the best customer satisfaction, not surprising, had the best stock price. And then they tried to figure out the correlation between what caused the CSAT scores, and they found out that companies with high Glassdoor scores had high customer satisfaction scores. Isn't that fascinating? That's absolutely fascinating.
I detested Glassdoor as an employer. I did. I hated it.
I know, and the problem is that you have to truly invest in order to make that happen. And I would say that nowadays, maybe the data is probably a little bit more full of noise. But for a while there, it was an interesting piece of data they used in their research, and we've found that to be true, right? Like if our employee engagement scores are high, my customer engagement and retention is high.
Yeah, absolutely. It just carries through like that. Yeah, for sure. All right, so those are two. What's the third thing you would put on this magical dashboard that we're creating?
You know, I wonder if you can identify this, a signal that's called danger. When should I be scared? Yeah, when should I be scared? I think that, I don't know what is the thing that drives it, but I don't think businesses spend enough time thinking about, like, that thing doesn't threaten me, but this thing does. I don't think that business owners or business leaders are often clear and present and delineating between the things that are true threats versus the things that are not threats. So they worry about the stuff that they shouldn't be scared about, and they're underreacting to the stuff they should be scared about.
Oh, fascinating. That's
Yes.
probably so true. Yeah. How would you decipher that signal? How would you?
Right. So I think that it's sitting down and saying, like, does this matter? Right? If this thing, you're playing like, it's almost like a strategic game. So you say, if all the analysts refuse to take my telephone call, what does that do to my business as an analyst relations firm? Yeah. Right? And that's a great question. Versus if AI changes how buyers buy and they never talk to an analyst again, what are the threats to my business, right?
Wow, yeah.
And many of those things, if you think about them long enough, they scare you, but then you think that you can plan for them, right? But then having that on a dashboard, and after thinking about it clearly, it's about monitoring, are there things that are happening in my business right now, and often they're macro and outside of my control, that are foundationally threatening my business and forcing me to manage differently.
Andrew, as an ecosystem builder, we often spend a lot of time talking to founders and funders, and builders. And I think I thank you for sharing your perspective with us, because I think one of the things that we probably don't acknowledge enough are those people who their job is to look across these things and give us kind of a spectrum view of an industry and some of these trends and some of these other things. And so it's been very insightful for me to, even after years of dealing with analysts and being in the market and doing those types of things, still fascinating to learn more about what goes into that, the thought process, and how we should be thinking about that. So thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us tonight. I appreciate that. I appreciate that work you've done in building Spotlight. Congrats. Do you know what you're doing next?
My promise to myself is I wasn't going to jump immediately full time, but I am.
I've seen too many people make that promise to them. Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen? I'm fully dedicated to still working with the nonprofit commitments that I have. Just like, I'm so basic. Every person that has an opportunity to do this, right, at the stage of their life, it's great to have the freedom to figure out what else you're going to build in community. But I have a feeling that there's going to be something that I want to build in business.
All right, you can come back and talk to us about it when you decide? All right, cool. Quick shout out, so you do a lot of work with nonprofit boards. You've been doing a lot of work. Any shout out you want to give? Like, who's your favorite, And I don't mean you, who's your favorite child kind of thing.
Right,
That's not one of those. But like any shout out you want to give to a nonprofit that's doing amazing work?
Absolutely. The organization I'm closest to and I think is just amazing is Canby's Markets. So they are in the food rescue and safety space and availability space. Remarkable work working with food that otherwise would be in our landfills and finding great homes for either with nonprofit partners in Kansas City that are truly feeding people and making it available at both a proximate and affordable price in community. It's fantastic.
That's awesome. And you know Max and that team are near and dear to our heart. They're a Social Venture Studio graduate. They were in our first cohort. So I love to hear you say that. So again, Andrew, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody for listening. Give him a hand, everybody.